This is part 2 of the interview between Narada Danvantari, of www.sacredgeometryweb.com, and Foster Campbell, of www.thrivemovement.org. View the whole discussion, with interactive links to other materials, at www.anewscienceofeverything.com/Foster.
Foster, last year when we were in Egypt together at the Resonance Foundation's first annual gathering, among the many highlights of an amazing trip was our visit to the oldest flower of life designs yet discovered anywhere on the planet, in a very powerful and beautiful and mysterious underground building called the sunken Assyrian temple at Abydos. Although there's one pair of designs that is the clearest and the largest, approximately a dozen similar designs are scattered on just two of the 3-meter high rectangular granite pillars that held up the roof of the temple. And the designs are emblazoned on the granite surface by unknown means. In Thrive, Nassim claims that they are laser burned into the rock, but this has been much contested. So academia believes that the whole temple was buried for around 2,000 years, from 100 BCE until about 1902, when it was rediscovered by the famous Egyptologist Flinders Petrie. And academia also claims that the designs are simply done in ochre by some hypothesized Greek scholars who were using the temple for unknown reasons. I find this whole story extremely improbable, especially the idea that the designs are done in ochre, as they are accurately done and they've survived 2,000 years in an often flooded underground temple. Surely moisture and time would have erased them by now. So would you share with us your thoughts about this mystery surrounding the Flower of Life designs in the Assyrian temple at Abydos, now that you've had a chance to see them for yourself?
Yeah, it was such a treat for me, because we created a scene in special effects in Thrive 1, where Nassim and I are on the magic carpet and we fly to the temple at Abydos. And to actually finally get to be there with him and with you and with so many people who are just steeped in an appreciation of this was one of the highlights of my life for sure. But in terms of what it is, I know that that Greg Braden and Nassim and others have talked about this being somehow laser etched, somehow etched into the atomic structure of the rock, and others have tried to debunk it and say, no, it's just painted on with ochre and so forth. But the debunking has not been effective, in my opinion. It's still very much up in the air to me. And what, for me, it's kind of like when someone tried to debunk Thrive or something like that. It's like it shows the evidence, and ultimately, what are we really talking about? What's the essence? What really matters for me is the recognition, the understanding of what the flower of life pattern represents, what it means. And let's say it is only, 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old. If the Greeks put it there, or the Sumerians, ultimately someone a long time ago had a deep understanding, to my sense, of the structure of the plenum. You and I understand from our studies that the space is not empty, even though it looks to be. Even out in deep space, it's not empty, and that's been verified. They've done studies on the wave patterns of light that come from distant galaxies and quasars, and they don't just come as a wave through, to Earth. They corkscrew as if they were going through a crystal, and that shape that you've got behind you there, the 64 tetrahedron crystal, they corkscrew as if they're going through that shape. And so the space itself seems to be quantized. And by that, I mean that that there are units. I think that the units are going to be toroidal vortices at every scale. And then, as we've talked about already, they create local geometries. But the key to me for the flower of life is that, as we depicted in Thrive, the two-dimensional pattern is a representation. It's like you draw on a piece of paper of the three-dimensional field, and an understanding of the three-dimensional field and the flower itself allows you to recognize that when you have a vector equilibrium, and then you have with eight tetrahedra, and then a star tetrahedra, and then you expand out to the next vector equilibrium with 64. That's the first time you have a balance of the vectors going out with the vectors going in, and all of a sudden there seems to be a quality to that particular boundary condition, that particular energy field, which is very important in terms of accessing energy, in terms of creating a black hole that has then its own gravitational field, which I believe is the key to interdimensional interplanetary travel. And this is what Stan Tenen was telling me back in 1983, that if you understand these geometries and can build technologies on it, all of this stuff is possible. And of course, there are people who are spelling out the theory and building the technologies now. But I think that these signatures were left for us as clues for people. When people are ready to understand those clues, then they will be ready to recreate the technologies. In this particular case, I believe the technology that was at the core of the Ark of the Covenant, what I believe was this plasma sphere that was inside the Ark and energized the Ark as a capacitor, and then the Ark in the sarcophagus of the King's Chamber energized the whole King's Chamber, which energized the pyramid. This is happening in pyramids simultaneously, as well as the Serapeum, I think it was called, the underground power station, where I think they were energizing not only the pyramids, but the entire plateau, and then tapping into that energy in various ways. But I've also met two people who were invited. They weren't abducted, they were invited. They had relationships with extraterrestrials. And this was multiple times, contact over multiple times and years and so forth. And they were ultimately invited onto a ship and went. And then they were given as a gift, they were shown the drive of the ship. And each time, these people didn't even know each other. I ended up introducing them. And we interviewed them for Thrive, and we depicted very, very briefly in there. They each described this 64 tetrahedron crystal, or this complex geometric crystal that's surrounded by this rainbow double torus that creates a gravitational field that, as long as you're inside of that, you can travel at these astronomical speeds and make right-hand acute angle turns, and you're not subject to the gravity of the Earth or the inertia of the ship. You're subject to the gravitational field of the black hole at the center of the flower of life that they have tapped harmoniously. So I think that the flower of life is the key to free energy. It's the key to the plasmasphere. It's the key to traveling amongst the cosmos, and most fundamentally to treating energy harmoniously. Because when we can do that, we can prove it as a species, that's when I think we'll be taken out of quarantine and allowed to actually travel off the planet. Until then, we're just too dangerous. You know, they tried to take a nuclear bomb to test it on the moon, and these ET ships came and knocked the missiles off of the ship that was taking it up there. The more advanced cultures know that we're still dangerous. They're trying to help us. They're coaching us. They can't do it for us. We need to actually evolve into this understanding and into this way of relating. But that too is one of the things that's so encouraging to me. I realize this is happening. This is the era where we've all come back for to help during this time, and it's going to happen.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, you've covered a lot there, and it took me back to the original realizations that Nassim passed on to me from Buckminster Fuller, which became the major point that I wanted to get across in my little booklet called Understanding Sacred Geometry and the Flower of Life, was the core symmetries of space are not just cubic, they're also triangular and tetrahedral. And then when Nassim was coming to Byron Bay, I think it was 2013, for 2 mornings before he came, I woke up in bed with what I call my brain being on fire, these ideas coming through and figuring out this thing. And I was trying to work out what the 4-dimensional vector equilibrium would look like, because one of my fascinations from the beginning of my geometric journey has been higher dimensional geometry, starting from when I was a teenager, reading books like Flatland and a primer on higher dimensional geometry, I think the other one's called. So in 4 dimensions, using basically the Pythagorean theorem and not much else, I calculated a particular shape and I constructed it. And I've got a version of it here, which I actually took to show Nassim the day after it was created. And it then took me another day or two to realize that not only is this the 4-dimensional vector equilibrium, or at least a projection of it down into 3 dimensions, to be accurate about that. These days, there's also a lot of higher dimensional geometry coming into mainstream physics. Garrett Lisi with his E8 model of subatomic particles, and the Quantum Gravity Research Group based somewhere in California, I believe, is doing amazing theoretical modeling based on higher dimensional geometries, but not just higher dimensional geometries, but higher dimensional flower of life structures, basically. They are the same symmetry groups, and those the importance of the flower of life and the vector equilibrium to me are that they show the basic symmetry groups of space in its simplest form. You used the word dimension twice in the last few minutes of your description of your understanding of the flower of life and how it relates to energy technologies and the possibility of extraterrestrial travel and so on. So I just thought I'd bring that back to you for a moment to see if you'd like to add anything to that before we move on.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think it's a really important area to discuss. I'm a real stickler for definitions. I think that the clearer we're able to define things, whether it's politics, philosophy, technology, whatever, the more clearly we're able to define things, the more we're able to understand them, but also to communicate effectively with one another. For me, dimensionality is a very useful tool for mathematics. I actually am not really a believer in multiple dimensions in reality. For me, the more effective term is frequency, or a frequency domain, because I think, like, you see the videos of UFOs that they're there and then they'll all of a sudden just blink out, or they'll blink out and show up somewhere else. I don't think they're entering another dimension. I think they're going to a frequency that our cameras or our eyes can't see. And then they're moving very quickly, and then they show up again. They come back into our frequency. It's the same with, I've had some clairvoyant experiences with particular beings where when they're in certain states, I can see their aura in colors, and then they'll shift to a different state and the auras will go back into the body. So, but to me, those are frequency shifts. And that I think we can all agree on, that human beings can sense with our 5 senses a very tiny little band of what we already know exists in the electromagnetic spectrum. And I'm sure that it goes infinitely above and beyond what our instruments can measure. So I think that for me, when I'm talking technically, it's more like, okay, what frequencies, and it's not just a frequency like, a 432 or whatever. It's where I think that the mathematics is particularly effective is in assisting us in creating three-dimensional frequencies. In other words, holograms. The Dr. Todd Ovakaitis, who we work with our hemolucent laser activated stem cell treatments, he spent 20 years and finally came up with this breakthrough of creating a hologram of frequencies. And once he got that right, that hologram activates dormant stem cells in your own body that have been dormant your entire life and wakes them up. And all of a sudden, they're this fountain of youth, equivalent of a day old. And he can direct them again with these laser frequencies anywhere in the body, and they'll just become, they'll start healing, and they'll become bone or tissue or organs or whatever. But the key there was that he accessed the chord of frequencies. So you could say a multi-dimensional frequencies, and if you can't hear them, you could say that it's, you know, fourth dimensional or something like that. But most fundamentally, I think that the key is that we're talking frequencies and patterns of frequencies, as opposed to thinking that we actually somehow leave the natural world when we go to other frequencies.
Indeed, our understanding of the nature of space and time seems to be incomplete still, and somehow involves the nature of vibration and frequency as much as it does the nature of shape. I think most people, when you say the word geometry, think of shapes and not even of vertices, as we were saying before, but of solid shapes. And
Right.
as we know, there are no such thing as solid shapes. So
Yes.
it's our consciousness trying to understand the nature of our experience and modeling it as space and time, and learning through that, we're trying to gain control over space and time.
Yeah.
And yet somehow frequency and vibration and harmonics and resonance seem to be the key to progressing beyond where we've got to so far.
Yeah, and we are, and fundamentally we're antennas. If we're not things, well, what are we? We're energy antennas that we can receive and we can transmit. We're transceivers. And so that gets into the whole realm of consciousness that we'll be exploring also in Thrive 2, and we'll be modeling the geometry of the quantum field and how it's manifested in healing and energy, but also in evolving our own consciousness. And I want to use that as an excuse for a moment to acknowledge your own work and your book, because I was blown away when you gave me a copy of your book in Egypt, and I told you it was, you know, it was, to me, it was like this cosmic comic book that had an effect on me that no other book had to that point. And I think I've been thinking about, why did it have such a deep effect on me? And I bought a bunch of them. I've been passing them out to people when they visit me. And I think that you nailed it when you, in the introduction of your book, you described yourself as a mystically inclined artist. And I think that's the power behind the book, is that literally every page of this could be a masterwork on a wall, or done at, ultimately I want to see it as a hologram that we can actually walk into and experience the frequencies.
Working on it.
Because, yeah, I'll bet you are. Because that's what happens for me. I turn a page and I'm in the patterns, but I'm also in the thinking, and I'm into the hologram of how you're bringing together ancient history, geometry, technology, and consciousness. Almost on every page, you're doing that. So I hope to see a real life interactive version of that, where one can walk in and actually experience these frequencies.
We could be a little way from that yet, but it was a great pleasure to share it with you too, Foster. I knew I had a connection with you on some level, but it wasn't till I came back home here and watched Thrive again that I realized how much of that book I'd pretty much stolen from Thrive, really. I had no idea how similar the content of the book was to the whole Thrive movie, starting from geometry, but going through ancient history, relating it to health, relating it to society, even touching upon conspiracy. I'm glad that I didn't know that when we met in Egypt, or I would have been seriously embarrassed to have given the book to you.
Oh no, I was so pleased to get it. And also you, in your letter to me inviting me to do this this conversation, yeah, I was very touched because you mentioned a video that I created called Spirit into Matter, the Geometry of Life. And that was a video that I created with Go Aloba, our visual effects guy, completely separate from the film. And it's, to me, it's one of the things that I'm most proud of and summarizes literally 30 years of work in all these different fields down into a few minutes. And I'm really glad that you came across that, because for people who are listening to this, who aren't as steeped in these different areas, I highly recommend that you go to thrivemovement.com and just put Spirit into Matter in the search window, and it'll come up with an entire web page about this, and then it has the video embedded in it, and the video will take you through a shorthand version of how the spirit comes into matter, shaping itself through the whole periodic table of elements, and then how we can apply it in all these different ways. So thank you for appreciating that, because that to me was just like a kind of a time capsule that I was creating and putting out there. It's like, that's going to be important for somebody someday.
And
also, by the way, I love that you're creating the jewelry, because you're literally embodying your understanding of this at a very complex level. For those of you who haven't seen Narada's jewelry, it goes way beyond the flower of life and the torus and the VE to really bring in some of these interdimensional shapes and so forth. So it's a great conversation starter. If you'd like to be talking about this rather than polarity politics at your next gathering, wear one of his necklaces. In fact, I've got, Kimberly got this one, the double torus, for me for my birthday when she was in Egypt with you guys.
Indeed. The first contact I had with what I would eventually call sacred geometry was when I was about 16 or 17, and a friend of mine had taught me how to draw in stereo, so you can draw the left eye's and the right eye's view and merge them together into a three-dimensional shape. And somehow I stumbled into a new way of three-dimensionalizing the hypercube. And it was decades after that of having an interest in these things, but not really going much further with it, before I stumbled across the work of Dan Winter and was introduced to the term sacred geometry. And then to have these geometries eventually shrunk down by the amazing process of 3D printing, so that we can wear them, and everywhere I go, people look at them and go, is that a Merkur Bar? Is the usual question I get, because they've got, no, that's the most likely reference they've got for it. And it's interesting because the Merkur Bar is traditionally, people think of the star tetrahedron, but more broadly, it's a interdimensional time ship or spaceship for your spirit body. And so the hypercube and the higher dimensional geometries are very appropriate linked to that sort of thing. So here we are in 2018 in, I guess it's always been an intense time on planet Earth, and it's always been in crisis in one place or another. But for me, the difference now, especially since the 1940s when the atomic bombs were let off and so on, is that never before has humanity had the ability to really destroy ourselves and take down a lot of the biosphere with us. And the exponential acceleration of our technologies, including now not just computers and the internet, but breaking technologies such as artificial intelligence and blockchain technologies that give us economic alternatives we've never had before, possibilities opening up on that level. So just before we end, I'd like to ask you to comment on where we are at now, both on a technological level and on an evolutionary level for humanity.
What a time to be alive as a human being. Oh my gosh. first of all, we got just such an amazingly beautiful planet to get to live on. It's definitely one worth saving. And this is a time when humanity has never been more at risk than we are now because of the technologies of mass destruction that have been developed and are now in the hands of childlike psychopaths. It's a very dangerous time in that way. But at the same time, we've never had a time, at least in recorded human history, when an individual or a group of like-minded individuals can collaborate and make a global difference almost instantaneously. And when I was in college, I had a bunch of friends who were brilliant engineers, and they told me, this was in 1968, 69, they said, we're in the process of creating a global instantaneous information delivery system. And I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. I say, okay, you guys go do that, because I don't have any idea how to do that. I'm going to work on content, because even if you can communicate with the whole world instantaneously, it really matters what you've become conscious of and what can the media teach people about. So the most encouraging things to me are that we have three really fundamental things. We have an understanding of the torus as the fundamental flow pattern of sustainable systems, really anywhere in the cosmos as far as we can tell. We understanding of the vector equilibrium, which is the fundamental structure underlying the whole quantum field of wholeness. And then we have the non-aggression principle. And the non-aggression principle is the application of the torus at the human level. With these three things, I believe that if we make it through the next 50 years, we'll actually be living in a thriving society that not only is totally prosperous in terms of having access to energy, access to heat, access to light, access to healing in very non-invasive, very natural ways, and living, who knows how long we can live when we're really healthy and can nurture ourselves from the wholeness of the quantum field. But we also have, with the non-aggression principle, that's the sacred geometry of human behavior. That's how no one imposes their behavior on anyone else. No one distorts anyone else's geometry. That's how we can collaborate as a voluntary global and galactic community. And it's the result of billions of individual decisions every moment. It's not the result of central planning and control of other people's lives. So with these three things, given that we already have them available, that vast numbers of people know about them already, I'm confident that over the next few years, this is the fastest growing thing on the planet. As far as I can see, we'll understand that AI is a critically wonderful tool for healing our bodies, for coordinating, for calculating and all that stuff, as long as it's voluntary, as long as we don't get caught into this myth that we can somehow transcend the human spirit by killing it off, thinking we're going to somehow put our spirit into a computer because it can calculate fast. It's the single most dangerous misunderstanding that I know of right now. But the number of people who understand not only that that's erroneous, but what the viable alternatives that are on the table. This is growing so fast. In Venezuela and Brazil, they're having thousands of young people are in the streets with signs saying less Marx, more Mises. And that means that's a reference to the non-aggression principle. And there's a conference that just ended in Mexico called in Acapulco. This is the fourth year of the conference. It started with 50 people, went to 100, went to 500. This year they sold out 1,500 seats 2 months in advance. And it's all about integrating these principles. And it's sacred geometry, it's cryptocurrency, but it's fundamentally the non-aggression principle manifested. And this is what's happening. Young people are catching on that libertarian politics is not good enough, even though it was an improvement. And socialist compassion, turns out it doesn't work because it's based on coercion. And there is an alternative that goes beyond this. And it starts with recognizing that we are an integral part of a whole and healthy system. And we can, on every single level, collaborate to restore the wholeness to natural systems, and we will be in a global and galactic community based on harmony, on collaboration, and that's what I call love.
Fantastic. I call that the biggest thing since rock and roll.
Oh, that's a stretch, but even the rock and roll has helped in that.
Well, I mean that in the sense that in the 60s we had an amazing global awakening, and one of the main phenomena there was the birth of rock and roll, and that since then we haven't had another wave that's as identifiable like that. But everything you've just summated for us then rolled into one as a popular global movement would, I believe, be the biggest thing since rock and roll.
Well, you've got an opportunity to embody that, I gather, coming up. I heard that you were invited to speak about sacred geometry at a conference, a gathering of 50,000 people, and I'm sure it'll probably be live streamed in Australia, because, you know, I've been invited to present at lots of festivals, and at first I thought, really? You know, I thought the festival, you know, they're wonderful. I thought it was, you know, dancing and sex and rock and roll and drugs, and so and it's not that it isn't that, but more and more they're wanting more. They're wanting to not only celebrate, but with the coherence of their energy, they want to transform the world. And so they were excited to learn about sacred geometry, to learn about the non-aggression principle, even to learn about the conspiracies and how to transcend them. So I think that particularly for young people attending these things, you're right, this is the next big thing. It incorporates the best from the past, but actually is transcendent for the first time without violating or forcing anyone.
So thank you, Foster Gamble. Please let us, before we go, tell us the names of your websites and anything you'd like us to be able to access as resources. And thank you so much for this time. You've clarified for me quite a few issues in how I'm going to explain sacred geometry to people at rock and roll festivals.
Right.
I look forward to it with a renewed spirit.
Well, our main website is thrivemovement.com. You can access virtually everything from there. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. There's a bunch of imitation sites on Facebook, but keep going until the one that says this is the genuine Thrive Movement site, Facebook page. And we've got an extensive YouTube channel that has animations of virtually everything we were talking about here, as well as a whole lot else in the more kind of current events type of and spiritual realms. And I don't remember what that is, but if you just go to YouTube and look up the Thrive channel, it'll present itself. But for everyone who's listening to this, I congratulate you on where you've come to in your consciousness, that you've learned about Narada and Pratima, and that you've opened your mind to this, because this is a portal to everything that you are looking for. And thanks for your attention in sitting through a long, but I hope interesting and valuable conversation.
Visit us at www.anewscienceofeverything.com. You will discover the latest news on the shift happening in humanity's worldview. We collate and reformat the Facebook content from the best researchers, scientists, and creative thinkers. Literally thousands of curated posts on every aspect of the new paradigm emerging in global society. Check it out now.